We're delighted that so many of you have joined us here in person, and pleased to welcome C-SPAN and their viewers who are interested in international trade and learning about the future of trade. Before we begin our program, I'd like to thank our partners at the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center who work with us on this event and all our events. We're very grateful for the partnership with them. I'd also like to give all of you watching a heads up about our upcoming events, including saying here for the first time, Ambassador Mike Froman will be giving his final keynote address as U.S. Trade Representative to WIDA on January 10th. And that same evening, we'll be having WIDA's annual members meeting and welcome to the New Year party. Later in January and into February, we plan to hold discussions about some of the hot issues that are being talked about today, including NAFTA, China, and the trade implications of U.S. tax reform efforts, which we're hearing a lot about these days. Ever since the election, people have been asking about the future of U.S. trade policy. At our website, www.americastradepolicy.com, and with our Next Gen Trade Initiative, we're going to be leading a conversation about the future of international trade policy. We all have our ideas about the direction of U.S. trade policy, but U.S. trade policy is not made in a vacuum. It's made in the context of a global and a globalizing economy. That's what today's discussion is about and why it is so important. In order to understand the future of American trade policy, we need to understand what's happening globally in international trade and investment. Today's panel will help shed light on that important topic. I'm pleased now to turn the microphone over to my friend Steve Lamar, Executive Vice President of the American Apparel and Footwear Association and President of WIDA. Steve?
Great, Ken, thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out on such a cold, windy morning here in Washington, D.C. I think there's no question that the next couple of years is going to be a time of change, or certainly a time of a lot of anticipation on trade, international competitiveness. Certainly, I'm getting a lot of questions from the folks with whom I work, and I know probably a lot of people have a lot of questions out there as well about what's going to happen, what are we going to see occur. We've got a great panel of experts here, but this is the panel that's not going to answer those questions. I think those questions are going to come after January, and be answered after January 3rd, when the new Congress takes office, and then after January 20th, after inauguration. And we're going to start to see some of the campaign rhetoric and the policy pronouncements and the tweets become translated into policies, actionable events, and so forth. And that'll be an opportunity for folks to learn a lot more about what's going to happen. What this panel can do is help us understand what is the reaction around the world, how are our friends, our trading partners around the world in very key areas observing the events as they're unfolding in Washington and the country, the news as it's coming out on a daily basis, and how are they reacting to it, how are they planning for it, what are their perspectives, what do they think should happen, or what are their perspectives as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce them, and what we're going to do is I'm going to ask each of them to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes, then we'll have some questions afterwards. So they do have answers for some of the questions. I'm just not sure which answers they're going to have, so I think it'll be great. First, to my immediate right is Wendy Cutler. She's Vice President and Managing Director of the Asia Policy Institute of the Washington, D.C. office. She joins the Asia Policy Institute following 3 decades as a diplomat and negotiator in the office of the USTR. Most recently, she served as acting deputy USTR, working on a range of U.S. trade negotiations and initiatives in the Asia-Pacific region. Annabelle Gonzalez is Senior Director of the World Bank Group Global Practice on Trade and Competitiveness. Previously, she served as Costa Rica's Minister of Foreign Trade, where she led efforts to join the OECD, implemented 6 major free trade agreements, and contributed to attracting over 140 new foreign direct investment projects. Her time as minister capped more than 15 years of service with the Ministry of Foreign Trade, where she held various positions. Damien Levy, in the middle there, is the head of the Trade and Agriculture section of the European Union delegation here in Washington, D.C. Before coming here, he was a member of the cabinet of the former EU Trade Commissioner, Carol de Gucht, and also headed the USA and Canada team of the Directorate General for Trade at the European Commission. He's been with the EU Commission since 2001. Bobby Pittman, to his right, is the Managing Director of Kupanda Capital, a boutique investment platform focused on Africa. Most recently, he was the Vice President of Infrastructure, Private Sector, and Regional Integration at the African Development Bank from 2009 to 2012.
He previously held senior positions at several U.S. government agencies, where he also worked on a variety of U.S. African economic policy issues, including the National Security Council, the Treasury Department, the State Department, and the White House. And then last but certainly not least, Kenneth Smith Ramos is currently the head of trade at the NAFTA office of the Ministry of the Economy of Mexico in Washington, D.C. Prior to serving in his current post, Mr. Smith was Coordinator General for International Affairs at the Mexican Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Rural Development, Fisheries, and Food. Previously, he worked at the Mexican Federal Competition Commission at the Ministry of Economy and at the Ministry of Economy. He started his professional career working for Mexico's NAFTA negotiating team, and he is a fellow board member here at WIDA. So without further delay, I'm going to turn the panel over, I guess the microphone over to Wendy.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, and thanks for everyone for turning out this morning. I just learned about the January 10th event with my former boss, Ambassador Mike Froman, so I can't wait for that event. That should be very interesting. This morning, I wanted to share with you kind of what I'm hearing from Asia. I'm just back from Asia. I'm in daily contact through my new position with former Asian trade officials, with current trade officials, and other opinion leaders in the area. And so I wanted to share with you kind of their perspectives, recognizing that there's not one Asia. Asia's a huge continent. There are a lot of different views. But there are some common threads, and I wanted to maybe go through a few. The first is, what we're hearing is that Asia really wants continued U.S. leadership and engagement on the trade agenda. Second, they're very concerned about rising protectionism. And here we're not just talking about tariffs, they're also concerned about maybe a robust use of U.S. trade laws. Third, they're concerned not only about things that have been said with respect to possible actions or measures against Asian countries like China, but they have broader concerns. They're concerned, for example, and I mentioned this to Ken as we were coming up to the stage, about what will happen with NAFTA. Because let's remember, a lot of number of Asian countries have moved some production to Mexico, and they would be affected by NAFTA. And so I would just say, while this panel we're speaking about different regions, there's a lot of overlap with respect to the impact of any measures taken on trade through the whole global trading system. Also, they want a stable U.S.-China relationship. And this isn't just trade, it's kind of overall. But in the trade arena, remember, for many Asian countries, China's their biggest trading partner, maybe the U.S. second. For certain countries, it's reversed. But they feel that they will be in the middle if there's any back and forth in terms of retaliation or measures between the two countries. And finally, I would say, like everyone in the trade community, they're waiting to see who will be on the trade team, and not just at the most senior levels, but at the deputy levels and other officials. What I wanted then in my remaining minutes is just talk a little about TPP and how Asian countries are responding to President-elect Trump's recent announcement that the U.S. will withdraw from TPP kind of on day one of his administration. There's a lot of concern. I mean, the TPP countries feel they did a lot of heavy lifting. They spent a lot of political capital responding to U.S. priorities in the negotiations. And so, right now, they feel that the U.S. Is not, living up to what they had hoped for. I will just say, a number of TPP countries are still going forward with the ratification process. Most recently, Japan passed TPP in their diet just last week. And as someone who spent a lot of time negotiating the Japan part of the TPP agreement, if you had told me a few years ago that we would end up where we are now, that we would be withdrawing from TPP and Japan would be passing this agreement through their diet, I would not have believed you. So how are TPP countries, or what options do they have to respond to what's going on in the region, and not just TPP countries, but non-TPP countries as well? First, as I mentioned, a number plan to go ahead and proceed with ratification. Japan, New Zealand, just a few weeks ago, ratified TPP. Australia's announced they're going ahead, Mexico and others. Vietnam, conversely, has announced it's not going to proceed with ratification. But very interesting, Vietnam has said they're going to go forward with passing reform legislation in a lot of the areas that have been called for under TPP. And other countries, I hope, as they upgrade their FTAs with other countries in the region, or they enter into new FTAs, or through the RCEP negotiations, will try and push TPP standards. A number of TPP countries, including Prime Minister Abe, have said they are going to try and persuade the president-elect to take a fresh look at TPP and really understand how it advances U.S. interests, both on the economic front and the geostrategic front, but also regional interests. Other TPP countries are talking about, could they do TPP without the United States? And all the 11 agree, not with excluding the United States, but keeping the door open for the United States to join later. But most important right now, I think a lot of countries are looking at their plan B in the region. A lot of these countries, they rely on trade. They recognize that trade contributes to growth and jobs. They want to attract foreign direct investment. They don't want to stand still. So they're looking at other negotiations in the region. And I think what we're going to see, and we're already seeing, is they're really stepping up their activity in ongoing negotiations. But I think we're also going to see new negotiations announced in the coming weeks and months. As long as TPP was going on and looked alive, a lot of these countries just didn't have the wherewithal to kind of give all their resources, all their attention to a number of negotiations. But with TPP is sidelined as it is now, they will have the resources, they will have the attention and the personnel to put into other negotiations. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is, the most viable alternative to TPP. A negotiation underway for about 5 years now, including 16 Asian countries, not including the United States, but including China and India. The negotiators just met last week in Indonesia. They're making good progress, and they're all talking about concluding these talks next year. A number of people have called RCEP the China-dominated negotiation in the region. I don't agree with that. It's an ASEAN central negotiation. But China now has almost gotten a renewed interest in this negotiation and is really stepping up its engagement as well. There are other negotiations that are underway. Japan and the EU are trying to see if they can at least conclude their agreement in principle by the end of this year. And their chief negotiator from the EU is in Tokyo, or en route to Tokyo. Australia and Indonesia are working on an FTA. New Zealand and China just agreed that they are going to upgrade their FTA. Canada and China are exploring an FTA. The Malaysian trade minister just expressed interest in entering into an FTA with Mexico, and the list goes on and on. Maybe I could just conclude, and you're looking at me, so I'm sure my time is almost up. But one issue I just want to put on the table, maybe we can get to it more in the Q&A, is when the president-elect announced he wanted to withdraw from TPP, he said that he was more interested in bilateral deals. So I know there's a lot of discussion in the trade community about the merits of bilateral deals. Can we move in that, in that direction? And what would it mean? And I think a lot of countries in Asia are also examining that and trying to think through these issues. The one country in particular whose name comes up when people talk about bilaterals is Japan. And in my conversations with the Japanese, they made it very clear that they're focused on TPP. They believe, getting the regional benefits of this deal are very important. And with the deal having just passed the Diet, this is the course they want to go. So I'm going to conclude there and just pass the mic.
All right, so thank you very much for having me here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Latin America. And in a similar sense to Asia, it is, of course, a diverse region, as we know. So when we talk about Latin America in general, we need to keep that in mind. That diversity probably manifests itself in several ways, but two that are important for discussion is